Hello everyone. Welcome back to my channel. Today, I want to share with you a story that still makes my hands tremble when I think about it. It's about trust, betrayal, and the moment when you realize that the person you raised, loved, and sacrificed everything for can become a stranger capable of unimaginable things. Have you ever wondered how far someone would go for money? How much a human heart can change when greed takes over? This is not just my story. It's a lesson about survival, justice, and the painful choice of letting go of someone you once called your own. The story begins. My name is Margaret Hayes. I'm 58 years old. And for most of my life, I thought I knew what love meant. I was a nurse for 32 years in Seattle. Spent my days caring for strangers, helping them through their darkest hours. My husband Henry, 62, worked as an engineer until he retired 5 years ago. We were simple people. We saved every penny. Lived modestly in a 3-bedroom house in the suburbs, and poured all our love into one person, our son, Daniel. Daniel was our miracle baby. I had 3 miscarriages before him, and when he finally came into this world, I held him in my arms and promised I would give him everything. And I did. Henry and I worked double shifts to send him to a good college. We helped him with his first car, his first apartment, his wedding to Vanessa 6 years ago. We thought we were building a bridge of love that would last forever. We were wrong. It started to crack about 2 years ago. Daniel began visiting less. His calls became shorter, more distant. Vanessa, his wife, was always polite but cold. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones. Then came the requests for money. First, it was $10,000 for a business investment, then $20,000 for unexpected expenses. We gave it all willingly because he was our son. But 6 months ago, when he asked for another $300,000 to cover debts we didn't fully understand, Henry and I had to say no. We didn't have it. Our savings were nearly gone. Daniel didn't take it well. He stopped calling altogether. Vanessa unfriended me on social media. It felt like we were being erased from his life. And the pain of that silence was worse than any physical wound I'd ever treated as a nurse. So when Daniel called 3 weeks ago, his voice warm and apologetic, saying he wanted to make things right and inviting us for a weekend trip to the Cascade Mountains, my heart soared. Henry was skeptical. He's always been the cautious one. But I convinced him. He's reaching out. I said, we have to meet him halfway. I should have listened to my husband's instincts. The drive up to the mountains was beautiful. October in Washington is stunning. The trees ablaze with red and gold. The air crisp and clean. Daniel picked us up in his new SUV, which should have been a red flag considering he'd claimed to be broke. But I ignored it. I wanted so badly to believe things were getting better. We talked about nothing important: weather, traffic, a new restaurant he wanted us to try. Vanessa hadn't come along. Daniel said she wasn't feeling well. Another lie. I would later realize. We reached the trailhead around noon. Daniel suggested we hike to Eagle Point. A scenic overlook, he said he'd discovered recently. It's about 2 miles up, but the view is worth it, he said with that smile I remembered from his childhood. Henry's knee had been bothering him. But he didn't want to spoil the moment. We started climbing. The trail was steeper than Daniel had described. Halfway up, I was breathing hard, and Henry was limping slightly, but Daniel kept encouraging us, staying behind us, almost herding us forward. Just a bit more. Mom, you'll love it. I promise. The forest grew thicker. We passed fewer and fewer hikers. By the time we reached Eagle Point, we were completely alone. The overlook was breathtaking, a rocky ledge jutting out over a valley, with a sheer drop of about 30 feet into thick brush and trees below. Daniel pulled out his phone to take pictures. "Let's get a family photo," he said. "Stand right there by the edge." Henry and I positioned ourselves carefully, our backs to the vast emptiness. Daniel held up his phone, framing the shot. Then everything happened so fast, and yet in slow motion. Daniel lowered his phone. His face changed. All the warmth drained out of it, replaced by something I'd never seen before. Cold determination. He stepped forward, and before I could process what was happening, he placed both hands on my shoulders and shoved hard. I stumbled backward, felt Henry grab for me, and then we were both falling. The world spun. Branches whipped at my face. My shoulder slammed into something solid, sending an explosion of pain through my body. Henry crashed beside me, his cry cut short by impact. We tumbled through brush and finally stopped in a tangle of undergrowth about 30 feet below the trail. I couldn't breathe. Every part of me screamed with pain. Above us, I could hear footsteps, Daniel, coming to the edge to look down. That's when Henry did something that saved our lives. Despite the agony, I could hear the ragged way he was breathing. He knew his ribs were broken. He leaned close to my ear and whispered 4 words I'll never forget. "Pretend we're dead. Don't move." His hand found mine in the dirt and squeezed once. I squeezed back. Then we both went completely still. I could hear Daniel above us, moving along the edge, trying to see through the thick brush. "Mom? Dad?" His voice was cautious, not concerned. He was checking his work, making sure the job was done. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it. A bird called somewhere in the distance. The wind rustled the leaves, and we lay there, 2 broken bodies playing dead, while our son, our only child, the boy I'd given everything to, decided whether we were dead enough to leave behind. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 3 minutes, I heard his footsteps retreat. He was leaving. He was actually leaving us here to die. A sob built in my chest. But I forced it down, forced myself to remain absolutely still. Henry's hand tightened on mine. We waited in silence, listening until we couldn't hear anything but the forest around us. Only then did I let myself cry, when I was certain Daniel was gone. I tried to move and immediately regretted it. White-hot pain shot through my left shoulder, dislocated. I knew from my years as a nurse. My head throbbed where it had struck a rock. Blood trickled down my temple. Warm and sticky. But I was alive. And that was more than Daniel had intended. "Henry," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Henry, are you okay?" His response came in labored gasps. "Ribs. Broken. Maybe 3. Can't breathe deep. Even in agony, My husband was trying to stay calm, to assess the damage clinically. That's who Henry was, methodical. Even in crisis. Your shoulder? Dislocated. I can probably pop it back in, but it's going to hurt like hell. I managed to sit up, every movement sending fresh waves of pain through my body. The brush around us was dense, which had probably saved our lives by breaking our fall. Through the branches above, I could see the overlook where we'd stood minutes ago. It looked impossibly far away. Henry struggled to a sitting position, his face grey with pain. We need to think clearly. He'll come back. Margaret, when he doesn't hear about our bodies being found, he might come back to check. Or he'll report us missing and join the search party to make sure we're really dead. The calculated way Henry spoke about our son's intentions made my stomach turn, but he was right. Daniel hadn't pushed us in a moment of rage. This was planned. The remote location, the timing, making sure we were alone. Every detail had been thought through. Why? The word came out as a broken sob. Why would he do this? Henry reached for my hand with his good arm. The house? The life insurance? We're worth more to him dead than alive. His voice cracked on the last words. We sat there, in the dirt and blood, facing a truth more painful than our physical injuries. Our son had tried to murder us for money. I thought back to 6 months ago when we'd refused to give Daniel another $300,000. He'd been angry. Yes, but I never imagined. This. What had we missed? When had the sweet boy who used to bring me dandelions turned into someone capable of this? I remembered his 10th birthday when he'd saved his allowance for 3 months to buy Henry a new fishing rod. I remembered him at 16, crying in my arms after his first heartbreak. Where had that Daniel gone? Margaret, we need to move. Henry's voice pulled me back to reality. It's almost 4 o'clock. We have maybe 3 hours before dark. And temperatures drop fast in October. If we don't get help before nightfall, hypothermia will finish what he started. He was right. But moving seemed impossible. My shoulder first. I said, I can't climb with it like this. I'd seen this procedure done dozens of times in the ER, even assisted with it. But doing it to yourself was different. I braced my left arm against my body and took a deep breath. On 3. 1. 2. I didn't wait for 3. I yanked my arm outward and upward. The sound of the joint popping back into socket was sickening, and the pain made my vision go white for a moment. But when it cleared, I could move my arm again, albeit with significant pain. Henry had managed to stand, hunched over to protect his ribs. The trails too steep, too exposed. But I heard water earlier. There might be a stream below us. Where there's water, there are usually hikers or campers. It was a slim hope, but it was all we had. We started moving downhill, supporting each other. Every step agony. The brush tore at our clothes and skin. Henry had to stop every few minutes to catch his breath, his face contorting with pain from his broken ribs. I was terrified. One of them had punctured a lung, but I couldn't think about that now. We had to keep moving. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, casting long shadows through the trees, I heard it, the blessed sound of running water. We pushed through a final thick patch of undergrowth and emerged on the bank of a small creek. Henry collapsed beside it, and I helped him drink, then drank myself, the cold water, shocking my system but clearing my head. That's when we heard voices, 2 hikers, a young couple in their 20s, came around the bend of the creek. The woman saw us first and screamed. I must have looked like something from a horror movie covered in blood and dirt. Clothes torn, moving like a zombie. Please. I managed to call out, please help us. We fell from Eagle Point. We need police. And ambulance. The young man already had his phone out. Calling 911. His girlfriend, to her credit, came closer despite her fear. What are your names? How long ago did you fall? She was trying to keep us talking. Keep us conscious. Margaret and Henry Hayes. Henry said, his voice weak but clear. Our son. We need to speak to Detective Morrison if possible. It's urgent. This wasn't an accident. The girl's eyes widened. But she nodded and relayed the information to her boyfriend. While we waited for help, I let myself lean against Henry, feeling his heartbeat against my back irregular and too fast. But there, we were alive, against all odds. Despite our son's best efforts, we were alive. But as I sat there in the growing darkness, listening to sirens approaching in the distance, I realized that surviving the fall was just the beginning. Now we had to decide what to do with the terrible knowledge we carried, that our only child was a would-be murderer. And that decision, I knew, would be even more painful than any physical wound. The ambulance ride was a blur of pain medication and questions. The paramedics were gentle but efficient, stabilizing Henry's ribs and immobilizing my shoulder. They kept asking what happened, and I kept giving vague answers. We fell. It was an accident. We got too close to the edge. Henry squeezed my hand each time, understanding we needed time to think before we said anything that couldn't be taken back. At Cascade Valley Medical Center, they separated us for treatment. I was taken to radiology for x-rays, while Henry went straight to the trauma unit. The shoulder was worse than I'd thought, not just dislocated but with torn ligaments. The doctor, a tired-looking woman in her 40s, named Dr. Blank, Chen, told me I'd need surgery within the week. I nodded, barely hearing her. All I could think about was Henry and whether his ribs had damaged anything vital. 3 hours later, a nurse wheeled me into Henry's room. He was awake, propped up in bed with his torso wrapped in compression bandages. His face was bruised, one eye swollen, nearly shut. But when he saw me, he managed a small smile. 4 broken ribs, he said quietly. No internal bleeding. Thank God. They want to keep me for observation for 48 hours. We were alone for perhaps 30 seconds before there was a knock on the door. A tall black man in his 50s entered, wearing a rumpled suit and an expression of practiced concern. Mr. and Mrs. Hayes. I'm Detective James Morrison. I was told you wanted to speak with me specifically. Henry and I exchanged a long look. This was the moment. Once we said the words out loud, there was no taking them back. Our son would become a criminal. Our family would be destroyed forever. But what was the alternative? Let him get away with attempted murder. Let him think he could inherit our house or life insurance, everything we'd work for, by killing us? Close the door, Henry said. Detective Morrison did, then pulled a chair close to the bed, his eyes sharp and assessing. Henry took a deep breath that made him wince. What I'm about to tell you needs to remain completely confidential for now. My wife and we need time to decide how to proceed. But we need your help. Morrison pulled out a notebook. I'm listening. So we told him everything. The strained relationship with Daniel, the money we'd given him over the years, the $300,000 we'd refused 6 months ago, the sudden invitation for a reconciliation trip, the isolated location, and finally, the moment when our son placed his hands on us and pushed, checking afterward to make sure we were dead before leaving us to die in the wilderness. Morrison's face remained professionally neutral, but I saw his jaw tighten. He took notes steadily, asking clarifying questions. Did anyone else know you were going on this trip? Did Daniel mention it to friends? Post about it on social media? I don't think so. I said. He picked us up at our house. But none of our neighbors were outside. We didn't tell anyone because... My voice broke. Because we were so happy he wanted to see us again, we didn't want to jinx it. What about your daughter-in-law? Vanessa? Where was she during this? Henry's expression darkened. Daniel said she wasn't feeling well. Stayed home. But I'd bet my life savings she knew exactly what was happening. They've been desperate for money. 6 months ago, Daniel told us he'd gotten into some trouble with gambling debts. Online poker. He said, lost over $300,000. We gave him what we could. But we couldn't give him more. We have a house worth about $1.2 million. And life insurance policies worth $500,000 each. Do the math. Detective Morrison did, his pen pausing mid-stroke. $2.2 million. More than enough motive for murder. Has your son tried to contact you since the incident? We don't know. I said. Our phones were in our pockets when we fell. Both destroyed. Morrison stood, pacing slowly. Here's what I need you to understand. What you're describing is attempted murder. Premeditated. If we pursue this, your son will likely face 25 years to life in prison. This isn't something you can take back once the investigation is official. Are you absolutely certain this is what you want? The question hung in the air. 25 years to life. I thought about Daniel as a little boy. How he used to crawl into our bed during thunderstorms. How he'd graduated top of his class. How he'd danced with me at his wedding. Whispering, "Thank you for everything." Mum, that Daniel felt like a different person. Someone who died long before yesterday afternoon. Detective Morrison. Henry said slowly, I need to ask you for something unusual. Can you keep our survival confidential for now? Just for a few days. Tell Daniel and anyone who asks that you've found our bodies. But don't reveal we're alive yet. I looked at Henry in shock. But he continued, I need to know what he does next. Does he cry? Does he feel remorse? Or does he immediately try to claim our assets? I need to know who my son really is before I decide whether to put him in prison. Morrison considered this, then slowly nodded. It's unorthodox. But given the circumstances, I can keep your survival quiet for 72 hours. After that, I'll need a decision from you both, about how to proceed. In the meantime, I'll start gathering evidence, check traffic cameras, interview potential witnesses, get a warrant for Daniel's phone records. But Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, I need you to prepare yourselves, whatever you discover in the next 3 days. It's probably going to hurt worse than that fall. He was right. Of course. But I had to know. I had carried Daniel inside me for 9 months. I had nursed him through fevers and failures, celebrated his victories, and dried his tears. Before I destroyed him, and make no mistake, that's what pressing charges would do. I needed to see with absolute clarity what he had become. Detective Morrison gave us a secure phone number where we could reach him 24/7. Before he left, he turned back at the door. For what it's worth, I've been doing this job for 28 years. I've seen a lot of evil disguised as family. Whatever you decide, don't feel guilty about it. You didn't push yourselves off that cliff. He did. After he left, Henry and I sat in silence for a long time. Finally, I said what we were both thinking. What if we don't like what we learn about him? Henry's one good eye met mine. Then at least we'll know the truth. And Margaret, sometimes the truth is the only thing that can set you free, even if it breaks your heart first. Outside the window, night had fully fallen. Somewhere out there, Daniel was going about his evening, probably believing his parents were dead or dying in the woods. In 72 hours, we would know exactly who our son had become. I wasn't sure I was ready for that knowledge, but I knew we needed it. The truth, however painful, was coming. Detective Morrison moved faster than I expected. By the next morning, he'd already set up a secure tablet in my hospital room with access to surveillance feeds he'd arranged. Your house has a Ring doorbell camera, correct? He asked. I nodded. I got a warrant. We're monitoring Daniel's activities remotely. You can watch if you want. But I warn you, it might be difficult. Henry had been moved into my room so we could recover together. He sat up in his bed. His face still a mass of bruises, but his eyes clear and determined. We need to see, he said quietly. Whatever it is, we need to see it. Morrison set up the tablet on a rolling table between our beds. I also obtained his phone records and bank account activity. The pattern is telling. He pulled out a folder. In the last 6 months, Daniel has lost exactly $417,000 in online gambling, casino apps, poker sites, sports betting. Vanessa's credit cards are maxed out at $93,000. They received 2 foreclosure warnings on their condo. They're drowning. And we were the life raft. I whispered. Or rather, our deaths were. Morrison nodded grimly. At 9:47 last night, Daniel called 911 to report you missing. I have the audio if you want to hear it. He pressed play on his phone. Daniel's voice filled the room, and I felt Henry tense beside me. My parents, they're missing. We went hiking at Cascade Mountains, and they wandered off the trail. I've been searching for hours. Please, you have to help me find them. His voice cracked with what sounded like genuine panic. If I hadn't known better, I would have believed him. He'd always been a good actor lead in the school play, 3 years running. The search and rescue team found you around midnight. Morrison continued. I personally informed Daniel at 6 o'clock this morning that we'd located 2 bodies matching your description at the base of Eagle Point. I told him the fall appeared fatal and that formal identification would take 24 to 48 hours due to the condition of the remains. My stomach turned. What did he say? He cried. Very convincingly. Asked if you'd suffered. I said it appeared to be instantaneous. Morrison's expression was hard. Then I watched him very carefully, and here's what happened next. He brought up the Ring doorbell footage. Time-stamped 7:32 that morning. Daniel arrived home, and Vanessa opened the door. For a moment, they just stood there in the doorway, where the camera could see them clearly. Then Vanessa asked something we couldn't hear. Daniel nodded, and Vanessa smiled. Not a sad smile. Not a sympathetic smile, but a broad, genuine smile of relief. She threw her arms around Daniel's neck. They stood there, embracing. And even without audio, their body language screamed. Celebration. Not grief. Tears burned my eyes. That's not mourning, Henry said, his voice flat. That's victory. Morrison fast-forwarded through the footage. At 10:15, a man in a suit arrived according to Morrison. A real estate agent Daniel had contacted 3 weeks ago. Right after inviting us on the reconciliation trip, they spent an hour inside, presumably discussing how to quickly sell our house. At noon, Daniel left and drove to a law office, his attorney helping him file paperwork to expedite the probate process. At 3:17, he went to the bank. That's where it gets interesting, Morrison said. He pulled up bank records. Daniel tried to access your joint account. Obviously, he couldn't without a death certificate. But he asked about the process. I wanted to know how fast he could gain control of your assets. The bank manager told him it would take at least 4 to 6 weeks. He got agitated. Said he had urgent debts that couldn't wait. Henry laughed. A bitter sound that made him clutch his ribs in pain. Urgent dette. He couldn't even wait for our bodies to be properly buried before trying to cash in. But the worst was yet to come. That evening, Morrison's surveillance showed Daniel and Vanessa at their condo. Through a window, Morrison had gotten creative with his investigation. We could see them in their living room. Morrison had managed to get a parabolic microphone aimed at the window. The audio was scratchy but clear enough. We need to be careful. Vanessa's voice said, Don't spend anything unusual until the estate is settled. No big purchases. No paying off the gambling debts yet. We have to look like grieving family. I know. Daniel replied. But God, it's finally over. I can't believe it actually worked. There was a pause, then the sound of a cork popping champagne. Through the window, we watched our son and his wife toast with expensive flutes we'd given them as a wedding gift. To freedom, Vanessa said, her voice clear as a bell. To finally being rid of those 2. No more guilt trips about money. No more disappointed looks. No more being treated like children. They should have just given us the money when we asked. Then none of this would have been necessary. Daniel's laugh made me flinch. Dad always said actions have consequences. Guess he was right. Their consequence for being stingy was that they had to die. Morrison turned off the audio. The room was silent, except for the beeping of Henry's heart monitor and my own ragged breathing. I wanted to vomit. I wanted to scream. I wanted to go back in time and somehow change everything. Make different choices. Raise a différent son. But most of all, I wanted to understand how the baby I'd held in my arms 32 years ago had become this stranger who could kill his parents and celebrate with champagne. "There's more," Morrison said quietly. He pulled out a final document. "We searched his internet history with the warrant 3 weeks ago, the same day he called to invite you on this trip." Daniel Googled, "How long does it take to die from exposure in the mountains?" "Average survival time after a 30-foot fall." "And do animal scavengers remove evidence from bodies?" He planned this methodically. "Mrs. Hayes, this wasn't a moment of desperation. This was calculated murder." Henry reached for my hand. His grip was weak, but it was there. "We've seen enough," he said to Morrison. "We know who he is now. What are our options?" Morrison sat down heavily. "You press charges. With the evidence I've gathered, the surveillance, the internet history, the phone records showing his gambling debts, or your testimony, we can get a conviction for attempted murder in the first degree. He'll get 25 years minimum, possibly life. The DA will want to move fast on this, given the severity and premeditation." "And Vanessa?" I asked. "Conspiracy to commit murder. She clearly knew about the plan beforehand and helped cover it up. She'll get 15 to 20 years. I looked at the tablet screen. Frozen on the image of Daniel and Vanessa toasting their champagne. My son. My baby boy. The child I'd rocked to sleep 1,000 times. Who'd called me his hero. Who'd promised at his wedding to make me proud. This was what he'd become. "Do it," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "File the charges." "All of them?" Henry nodded agreement. 28 years ago. I held him when he was born and promised to teach him right from wrong. I failed somewhere along the way. But I won't fail now. He needs to face the consequences of what he's done. Morrison stood. "The arraignment will be in 72 hours. Are you prepared to face him in court?" I thought about that for a long moment. Was I prepared to stand in front of Daniel and tell the world what he'd done? To watch him be taken away in handcuffs? To destroy any chance of reconciliation forever? Then I remembered the sound of his laughter as he toasted to our deaths. And I knew the answer. "Yes," I said. "I'm ready. Because the Daniel I loved died a long time ago. The man who pushed us off that cliff is someone I don't know. And that stranger needs to pay for what he's done." 3 months later, I stood in the King County Superior Court, my shoulder still aching in cold weather. A permanent reminder of that October day. Henry sat beside me in the front row, moving carefully to protect ribs that had healed but would never be quite the same. Detective Morrison had worked tirelessly, building an airtight case. Today was the trial. Daniel was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed. When he saw us, his face went chalk white. He stumbled, and the guard had to steady him. "Mom?" His voice was barely a whisper. "Dad?" But they said you were dead. I met his eyes and said nothing. There was nothing left to say. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Linda Chen, presented the evidence methodically. The internet search history displayed on screens for the jury. How to make a hiking death look accidental. Inheritance laws in Washington state. How long before someone is declared legally dead? The gambling records showing $417,000 lost in 6 months. The bank statements proving Daniel and Vanessa were 3 months behind on their mortgage. Then came the surveillance footage. The jury watched in silence as Daniel and Vanessa embraced in their doorway. Smiling, they watched the champagne toast when Vanessa's voice came through the speakers. To finally being rid of those two, several jurors visibly recoiled. Detective Morrison testified about finding us, about Daniel's fake concern, about the real estate agent contacted before we'd even been reported dead. The young couple who'd found us by the creek testified about our injuries, our fear, our insistence on speaking to police. A forensics expert explained how our injuries were consistent with being pushed, not falling accidentally. Then it was my turn to testify. I walked to the witness stand on legs that felt like water. The bailiff swore me in. Linda Chen approached gently. Mrs. Hayes, can you tell the court what happened on October 15th? I took a breath and began. I told them about Daniel's call. The invitation that had filled me with hope. The drive to the mountains. The hike to Eagle Point. I kept my voice steady. Clinical. The way I used to report patient conditions during my nursing shifts. But when I got to the moment when Daniel placed his hands on my shoulders and pushed, my voice broke. I didn't understand at first. I said, my mind couldn't process that my son, the child I'd carried and raised and loved, was trying to kill me. Even as I was falling, part of me thought it must be a mistake, an accident. But then I heard Henry hit the ground beside me, heard him struggling to breathe, and I knew it was no accident. What happened next? Linda asked. My husband whispered 4 words that saved our lives. Pretend we're dead. So we lay there in the dirt and blood while Daniel checked to make sure he'd succeeded. We listened to him walk away and leave us to die. A mother knows her child's footsteps. Ms. Chen, I knew those footsteps. And I knew when they walked away without calling for help, without trying to climb down to us, that I'd lost my son long before that day. The defense attorney, a slick man, in an expensive suit. I tried to break my testimony on cross-examination. Isn't it possible you simply fell? Mrs. Hayes, that your injuries and the trauma have confused your memory? I looked directly at Daniel. He couldn't meet my eyes. I've been a nurse for 32 years. I know the difference between falling and being pushed. I know what hands feel like when they're placed deliberately on your shoulders with force. And I know what betrayal feels like when it comes from your own child. Henry testified next. His engineer's mind providing precise measurements, angles, force calculations. A fall from that position would have sent us forward, away from the cliff. We went straight back. That only happens with applied force from the front. A push. The trial lasted 4 days. Vanessa was tried separately, but her attorney had already negotiated a plea deal, 15 years, in exchange for testifying against Daniel. She took the stand and confirmed everything. Yes. They'd planned it. Yes. Daniel had researched methods for 3 weeks. Yes. They'd celebrated afterward. Her testimony was cold, mechanical, showing no remorse. She'd been promised a reduced sentence, and she was delivering her end of the bargain. On the fifth day, closing arguments concluded, and the jury deliberated for just 6 hours. When they filed back in, their faces told the story. The forewoman stood, on the count of attempted murder in the first degree. We find the defendant guilty. Daniel's knees buckled. His attorney caught him. The judge set sentencing for 2 weeks later. At sentencing, Daniel was given the opportunity to speak. He stood, tears streaming down his face, and turned to face us. "Mom, Dad, I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened to me. The gambling, the debt, I wasn't thinking clearly. I was desperate. I never meant to actually hurt you. Please, please forgive me." The judge waited to see if we would respond. Henry remained silent. But I stood up, my legs steady now, my voice clear. "Daniel, I lost a son 6 months ago. Not when you pushed us off that cliff, but when you chose money over family, when greed became more important than love. The boy I raised would never have done what you did. So I'm not losing you today. I lost you long ago. What I'm witnessing now is simply a stranger receiving the consequences of his actions." The courtroom was absolutely silent. Daniel collapsed back into his chair, sobbing. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Judge Patricia Morrison, addressed him directly. "Mr. Hayes, I've presided over many cases in my career, but few have disturbed me as deeply as this one. You didn't just attempt to murder 2 people, you attempted to murder the 2 people who gave you life, who sacrificed everything for you. The premeditation, the callousness, the celebration afterward. These factors compel me to impose the maximum sentence allowed by law. You are hereby sentenced to 25 years in the Washington State Penitentiary without possibility of parole for 20 years. The gavel came down with a sound like a door closing forever. Guards moved forward to take Daniel away. As they led him past our row, he tried one more time. "Mom, please, don't do this. I'm your son." I looked at him one final time. "No," I said quietly. "My son died when he became someone who could murder his parents for money. You're just the person who took his place." Then I turned away and didn't look back. 2 years have passed since that courtroom. Henry and I sold our house in Seattle, too many memories, too many ghosts, and moved to a small craftsman home in Portland, Oregon. The change of scenery helped more than I expected. New city, new routines, new chance to rebuild lives that had been shattered on that cliff. Physical therapy took months. My shoulder would never be the same. I couldn't lift anything heavy. And cold weather brought deep aches that reminded me of that day. Henry's ribs healed. But he moved more carefully now, more aware of his mortality. We both walked with slight limps, our bodies carrying permanent evidence of our son's betrayal. But we were alive. And some days, that felt like enough. The hardest part wasn't the physical recovery. It was rebuilding our sense of trust, of purpose. For 32 years, we'd organized our lives around being Daniel's parents. Everything we did working extra shifts, saving money, making sacrifices had been for him. When that purpose was ripped away, we felt hollowed out, directionless. Who were we if not Daniel's parents? What was the point of the life we'd built? The answer came unexpectedly 6 months after the trial. I was volunteering at a community center in Portland, helping organize donated clothes, when a woman approached the information desk in tears. She was maybe 45, thin and exhausted looking, wringing her hands. "I need help," she said. "My son is addicted to opioids. He stole everything from me. My savings, me juveler, even my car title. Yesterday he threatened me because I wouldn't give him more money. I don't know what to do. He's my baby. But I'm afraid of him now." The volunteer coordinator started to direct her to addiction resources, but I stepped forward. "Wait," I said. "Can I talk to her?" The coordinator looked surprised but nodded. I led the woman, her name was Rachel, to a quiet corner and sat with her while she cried. "You think you're supposed to save them?" I said quietly. "You think if you just love them enough, sacrifice enough, give enough, they'll come back to being the child you remember? But sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes the only thing left to do is save yourself." Rachel looked at me with swollen eyes. "But he's my son. How do I give up on my own child?" "You're not giving up," I told her. "You're choosing to survive. And maybe, when he hits bottom and you're not there to catch him, he'll finally learn to catch himself. Or maybe he won't. But either way, you'll still be alive. You'll still matter. Your life has value beyond being his mother." I told her my story then. Not all of it, but enough. The desperate attempts to help Daniel, the money we'd given, the excuses we'd made, the moment when helping him meant destroying ourselves, the choice we'd had to make. Rachel listened, tears streaming down her face. And when I finished, she said, "Did you ever stop loving him?" The question caught me off guard. Did I still love Daniel? I thought about it carefully. I loved the memory of who he was. I said finally, "The little boy who existed before greed and addiction took over, but the man he became? The one who tried to kill us? No, I don't love him. I don't even know him. And I've had to learn that it's okay to grieve both the child who's gone and the relationship that died with him." After that conversation, Henry and I started volunteering at the Crisis Counseling Center regularly. We worked with families dealing with addiction, financial abuse, domestic violence situations where love had been weaponized, where family bonds had become chains. I found a strange kind of healing in helping others navigate the same impossible choices we'd faced. Our pain, our experience, suddenly had purpose again. Henry threw himself into it with the same methodical dedication he'd brought to engineering. He started a support group for parents of adult children who'd harmed them financially, emotionally, physically. The first meeting, we expected maybe 3 or 4 people. 27 showed up. There were so many parents carrying the same secret shame that their child, the person they'd loved most in the world, had hurt them. And they didn't know whether to forgive, forget, or fight back. Society tells us parents must love their children unconditionally. Henry said at one meeting, but what they don't tell you is that unconditional love doesn't mean unconditional tolerance of abuse. You can love someone and still protect yourself from them. Those two things aren't mutually exclusive. The group grew. Within a year, We had over 60 regular members and had started satellite groups in 3 other cities. We called it Second Chance Parents, not because we were giving our children second chances, but because we were giving ourselves permission to have a second chance at life beyond the identity of someone's parent. Letters from Daniel arrived monthly at first, forwarded through our attorney. Henry refused to open them. I read the first 3, full of apologies and promises to change. But they all felt hollow words, written because he was supposed to write them, not because he truly understood what he'd done. After the 3rd letter, I stopped opening them too. We both agreed. Unless he served significant time and showed genuine transformation, not just remorse at being caught, we wouldn't respond. One afternoon in our second Portland winter, I was working in our small garden. I discovered a love for growing things, for nurturing life that didn't ask anything of me except water and sunlight when Henry came out holding his phone. "Margaret," he said, his voice strange. Daniel's attorney called. He's applied for early parole. Good behavior. Completed addiction treatment programs. Got his GED while inside. The parole board hearing is in 3 months. They want to know if we'll submit a victim impact statement. I sat back on my heels, dirt under my fingernails, and felt the old wound reopen. Just when we'd started to heal, here it was again, the choice. Speak at his hearing and potentially keep him in prison longer, or stay silent and let justice take its course without us. "What do you want to do?" I asked Henry. He looked at the garden, at the house we'd built our new life in, at the calm we'd fought so hard to create. "I want to write that statement," he said finally. "Not to keep him in prison if he's genuinely changed. He's done his time. But I want him to hear, one more time, what he did to us, what he destroyed. I want those words on record, so if he ever has children of his own, someday they might understand that actions have consequences, that you can't undo some things with apologies." So we wrote it together. Carefully and honestly, we described the physical injuries that still plagued us, the nightmares where we were falling again and again, the years of therapy, the loss of trust in our own judgment. But we also wrote about what we'd built from the ruins, the community centre work, the support groups, the other parents we'd helped. We wrote that we'd taken the worst thing that had ever happened to us and transformed it into something meaningful. We ended the statement with this: "Daniel Hayes tried to kill us for money. He failed. We survived. And we rebuilt. Whether he spends 5 more years or 15 more years in prison is not our decision to make. We've given him enough of our lives. What we want now is simply to be left in peace, to continue the work we've started, helping other families navigate the painful truth that sometimes love is not enough. And survival means letting go." The parole board denied Daniel's request. He would serve his full sentence. When we received the news, Henry squeezed my hand and said simply, "Good. We made a decision that day. We contacted our attorney and had our wills rewritten. Every asset we owned, the house in Portland, our remaining savings, the life insurance policies Daniel had once tried to murder us for, would go to the Second Chance Parents organization we'd helped build. Daniel would inherit nothing, not out of spite, but because we'd built this new life from the ashes of what he'd destroyed. and we wanted it to continue helping others long after we were gone. We also added a clause that Daniel was not to be notified of our deaths, not to be invited to any funeral or memorial service, and that if he attempted to contest the will, he would be prosecuted for harassment. Our attorney, a kind woman named Patricia, hesitated. "Are you sure? He's still your son?" "No," I said firmly. "He stopped being our son the moment he chose to become our murderer. We're simply acknowledging what's already true." The letters from Daniel continued to arrive for the next 3 years, monthly at first, then quarterly. Then they stopped. We never opened a single one. Henry burned them in our fireplace. Watching the pages curl and blacken, "Some bridges you burn on purpose," he said, "so you can't be tempted to cross back to places that hurt you." We thrived in Portland. The support group expanded to 12 cities. We published a book, When Your Child Becomes a Stranger, about navigating family betrayal. I completed training as a peer counselor. Henry became a consultant for other nonprofits working with families in crisis. We built a life that was rich and purposeful, defined not by the son who'd betrayed us, but by the hundreds of people we'd helped find their own paths to survival and healing. On Daniel's release date 10 years later, we didn't acknowledge it. We didn't need to. He was released into a world where we'd moved on completely. We'd changed our phone numbers years ago, moved once more to a smaller house, removed ourselves entirely from his orbit. As far as we were concerned, he was a stranger who'd once committed a crime against us, served his time, and was now free to live whatever life he could build. But that life would be built without us. One day, maybe 5 years after his release, Henry came home from the grocery store, looking troubled. I saw him. He said, "Daniel." He was working as a cashier at the Safeway on Morrison Street. He looked older, tired. He didn't see me. I switched lines. But Margaret, he looked so alone. I felt a flicker of something, not quite sympathy, but an echo of old feeling, like a phantom limb. "Do you regret our choice?" I asked. Henry thought about it for a long moment. "No," he said finally. "I feel sad for him for the life he could have had if he'd made different choices. But I don't regret protecting us from him. Some people prove they can't be trusted. And once that proof is absolute, believing in them again is just setting yourself up to be hurt. He had every chance in the world. He chose violence. That's on him, not us." We never spoke of seeing Daniel again, though I'm sure Henry must have encountered him occasionally in our small city. We never reached out. We never softened. And gradually, even thinking about him became rare, a name from the past, a chapter we'd closed and moved beyond. On our 40th wedding anniversary, Henry and I renewed our vows in a small ceremony surrounded by friends from the support group, volunteers from the center, people we'd helped over the years. We wrote new vows that reflected who we'd become: survivors, healers, people who'd learned that sometimes the strongest love is the love you give yourself by walking away from those who hurt you. That night, Henry raised a glass of wine in our living room and said, "To second chances, the ones we give ourselves, not the ones we waste on people who've proven they don't deserve them." I clinked my glass against his. To survival, to choosing ourselves, to knowing that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let go completely and never look back. We drank to that truth and meant it years later, when Henry passed away peacefully in his sleep at 78. The funeral was attended by over 200 people, all the lives we'd touched, all the families we'd helped. Daniel was not among them. I'd made sure of that. Henry was buried with full honors for the life he'd lived after surviving. Advocate, counselor, survivor, hero, not victim, never victim. I lived another 7 years after that, continuing the work until my body gave out at 85. In my final days, surrounded by the family we'd chosen, the community we'd built, someone asked if I had any regrets. I thought about Daniel, about the grandson I'd never met, about the relationship that could have been if he'd made different choices. No, I said clearly. I don't regret protecting myself. I don't regret choosing life over loyalty to someone who tried to take my life. The only thing I regret is not recognizing sooner who he'd become. But that's okay. I learned, and I spent the rest of my years helping other people learn too. That's enough. That's everything. When I died, my will was executed exactly as written. Every penny went to second chance parents, which continues operating today. Daniel received a single notification that his biological parents were deceased, that per their explicit wishes he was not invited to participate in any memorial activities, and that he'd been disinherited entirely in favor of an organization dedicated to helping the victims of family violence. I like to think he understood, in the end, what he'd traded for $417,000 in gambling debts. He'd traded us imperfect, human, loving us for nothing at all. And we'd taken that nothing and built something beautiful that would outlast us all. Some endings aren't happy. Some are just final. And sometimes that's the kindest ending possible. Thank you so much for staying with me through this journey. If this story touched your heart or made you think about the complicated nature of family, love, and survival, please consider subscribing to the channel. Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And remember, your life has value beyond the roles other people assign you. Sometimes choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. Until next time, take care of yourselves. You matter. Retry.